Have I ever talked about a book that I read and didn't rate? I don't think so. So stay tuned for a book that I read and just couldn't give a rating to. Hey guys, what is up? My name is Kaylee. Welcome back to my channel. Today it is the middle of April, so I thought it was about time that we get into what I read in March. I read 13 books in March, lots of audiobooks, a couple ebooks, yada yada. One book, as I said, I didn't give a rating to. 4 books, I gave 3 stars. 6 books, I gave 4 stars. And 2 books got 5 stars from me in the month of March. The first book of the month that I read in March was Tomi by Junji Ito. This is a manga. It's a horror manga. It's about a girl who, in the very first chapter, dies on a school field trip, and her teacher's solution to her death is to chop her into a bunch of pieces and pass her out to his class to dispose of her body parts wherever they think is the smartest place to do it. And the following chapters are about the repercussions of that, because she is not actually dead and she comes back to haunt them and the rest of the world. What I will say about it is that the art was super awesome. The horror was very well done. It was my first horror. No, that's not true because I've read Death Note. Outside of Death Note, this was the first horror compilation that I've read. I really enjoyed it. The problem that I had with it is that it was a little bit all over the place. It wasn't very consistent. Each chapter was its own separate moment of story with the same otherworldly ghost-like creature thing, haunted, whatever you want to call it. Wow, I'm doing a fantastic job here. Every chapter is a completely different story from the one before it. There's some interwoven parts, especially in the beginning. You start out very connected to the very first story in which she dies. But then it gets very broad, and because of that, it became repetitive. It started to feel like you were seeing the same thing over and over again, just with new and random people. Because of that, it felt less linear. So I did give it 4 stars. It could have been a 5-star if it just had a little bit more cohesion. Next up, I'm proud of myself. I finally began to tackle the Mortal Instruments. So I read City of Bones and City of Ashes back to back via audiobook. Gave them both 4 stars. I really went in with very, very low expectations. So maybe that helped. Story, I won't go into it because all of BookTube has read this, basically, the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and I am very, very far behind on this bandwagon. But the story is about a girl named Clary who gets thrown into this world that her mother's been a part of when her mother goes missing. And that is the Shadowhunter world, where there are other creatures. There are demons and sorcerers and werewolves and vampires and just a whole slew of otherworldly things that Clary now has to deal with in order to find her missing mother. I had a lot of fun with both of these, and later on, I didn't read it in order, but later in the month I'd intended to save this for my owls, and that is City of Glass, the 3rd in the initial trilogy. All of them got 4 stars, so I'll just lump them together. So I thought the series was fun, and I was shocked by how well written it was. I thought it would be a lot more campy, and no offense to Twilight fans, but I thought it would be written a lot more like Twilight was, which is just not my style, but it wasn't. I had a lot more fun with it. The problem I mostly had with it is something that is probably due to my age, but I found Jace and Clary both relatively annoying throughout the whole thing. Plus we know the storyline about them that is a little bit wonky, and then gets better as the trilogy progresses. However, they were annoying enough that it did take my enjoyment out a little bit, especially because I got really annoyed by Jace often because I felt like he overreacted a lot of the time. He was very woe is me, and all I kept thinking is like, Clary just found out her entire world isn't what she knew, and her mom has been lying to her whole life, and she's handling it so much better than you, who's been part of the Shadowhunter world your whole life, are doing. So I don't know, that just really stuck with me and is something that I keep coming back to when I think about my enjoyment of the novels. But overall, I'm enjoying it, and I've carried on with the Infernal Devices, and I'm excited to finish these first 9 novels in the Shadowhunter world. All right, the next book that I read was for a buddy read-along hosted by Julie over at Pages and Pens, and it's a book that I'd really, really wanted to read and anticipated absolutely loving, but it's a very thick one, and I wanted to jump in when the buddy read was announced because I thought it'd be the only way that I could make myself read it. And I was really, really let down. And the thing is that I vlogged my experience with this, spoilers left and right in that vlog, and my opinion has since changed over time. I gave it a 4-star, I believe, at the end of the vlog, saying that there were some things that held me back from loving it. I did have an emotional reaction to aspects of it at the end, but the more it sat with me, I should probably just tell you what it is. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. How do I say this? I had a lot of conversations in my comments on the vlog about my changing opinion as I distanced myself from having read the book. So how do I sum it up? I felt like this was too much. One thing I'll note that I don't know if this will sit well with everybody, but I didn't realize that the author was a woman. Throughout the whole read, I just in my head was a man that wrote it. And that's because all 4 of the main characters are men. And we're also dealing with male-male relationships, and we're also dealing with male sexual abuse. So in my head canon, it was a male writing it. This ties in with the fact that the entire book was basically emotional torture porn. Not a single thing that happened in this, aside from one couple finally getting together, was happy or lighthearted. Everything was just really, really awful all the time. And it's a thick book. I can see why people really connect with it and love it. And obviously there's tons and tons and tons of trigger warnings for this series. Anything you can think of is probably in this. So I wouldn't read it if you have any kind of trigger warnings that steer you away from any kind of books, because it's probably in here. And that's what I'm saying, is that this woman took queer men and basically wrecked their lives for, how many pages was it? Over 700 pages. And it takes an emotional toll. So as I was reading it, I was connecting to it because she's playing so hard at your heartstrings. But the more I have sat on the book, the more I recognize that I just didn't like it. Like, there was no reason for these people to go, all of the main characters, to go through as much as they did on page, while also being wildly rich and successful when they came from like nothing. It seemed like a fever dream, and a fever nightmare at the same time. And it just isn't sitting as well with me as I had initially thought right after reading it. So I did lower it to 3 stars, which is probably still being generous, but I did think the actual writing is well done, a little pretentious, but not poorly written. So a 3-star feels like a good middle ground to say that I don't recommend it at this point. If it's something that doesn't sound like you want, if you don't want to be drugged through the gutter for 700 pages, this isn't the book for you. Next up, I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and I gave it 4 stars. I read this for the Elderling Along, which I will have all the hosts linked down below. I gave it 4 stars, but I don't know if I'll continue on with the Elderling Along. I didn't love it enough that I want to commit to the epic series that Robin Hobb writes, because it does fall into the category for me I struggle with sometimes with high fantasy, where a lot of the stories just kind of follow the same general plot line. And unless something like super different or like it diverges from the normal path happens, it all just ends up melding together in my mind. Like Assassin's Apprentice is The Lies of Locke Lamora, is The First Mistborn. Like they all just, there's a guy that ends up being an assassin, even though maybe it's not like his favorite thing to do. And then things happen and I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I did like the depth of character Fitz. You really grow to care about Fitz through this. I did like the magic system. He has the ability to kind of become one with animals, specifically a dog that you really feel for in the first part of the book. And the end, the climax, like the end of the story was good, and I really like the politics was there. It wasn't overwhelmingly political. It wasn't really a twist, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it was a twist. To find out what everything was centered around was a fascinating way to do it, and how it all wrapped up was nice. But I guess I can sum it up as saying it just didn't stand out to me. The next book I read was my first 5-star of the month, and I did listen to it on audiobook. That is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book has a lot of buzz, and in my opinion, it should. I picked it up solely because of the buzz and because the subject matter spoke to me, I guess, is a weird way to say it because I don't have any like relation to the topic, but there are a lot of trigger warnings in this story because it is from the perspective of a young girl who is groomed into a relationship with her teacher who is like in his mid 40s, and she's 15 or 16 when it starts. She thinks it's love eventually, but the way it progresses through her point of view, you see her grapple with deep down knowing that it's not probably proper, but also feeling like she's in love with this man who's showing her all these ways in which he loves her and how they're meant to be together. There are some very, very rough and graphic scenes. We're also dealing with her present day in her 30s and how she's never been able to really recover from it. She's seeing a therapist. It all comes about because things are being brought back to light that this man has abused other girls, other young girls, and some of them have come forward, and they want her to come forward because everyone knew about this relationship, and the school, which was a private school, swept it under the rug. It is a hard read. It is an emotional read, but I think it was really well handled and really well done. And at the end of the audiobook, there was a brief interview with the author and the narrator of the audiobook, and it was also interesting to hear the author talk about the work that she wrote. No going in that it is not the easiest book to read, but it was really well written and really well done in my opinion. And it was, I don't know what my favorite book of the month was, but this is probably it. I would say my Dark Vanessa is tied for first with another book I'll talk about soon. So next I listened to The Last of August by Brittany Cavallero. This is the second book in the Study of Charlotte series and will probably be as far as I go in the series. I gave it a 3-star. It was mediocre. I thought the first book, which I believe I gave 4 stars, was a lot more interesting. You got more character depth and interaction, and I had a lot more fun with it. Whereas this one I found myself zoning in and out of the audiobook because I just didn't really care about the story this time around. So just not as gripping as the first. I gave it 3 stars, and I probably will not carry on with the Study in Charlotte series. Next, I listened to Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. I went on like this because Animal Crossing came out. I just got audiobooks out of my library that were available and were books that I had at some point had interest in and just never gotten around to. So it's no surprise that I have a bunch of like 3 and 3.5 and low 4-star reads this month because I was just backlisting and audiobooking. Neverworld Wake was a very interesting story because it deals with a girl whose boyfriend, she's in high school, has died. His name is Jim. She's kind of shut herself off from their friend group since the death, but she decides to go up to this cabin in the summer with all these friends from the friend group that she hasn't seen because she feels like it's time to kind of try and integrate back in. Except when they wake up at the cabin, they realize they've started the previous day over and it becomes a Groundhog Day. Every morning they keep waking up at the same day. It's the same day over and over again, no matter what they do. So they all, through all this time, start going out and branching out and doing all these different things and trying to figure out how they're going to break this loop. And it all kind of comes down to what happened to Jim. It was interesting and the ending was fine. I was not blown away by the entirety of the story and I wasn't very gripped by it, but was fun and unique. I would recommend it even though I only give it 3 stars. And my second favorite read, well, my tied for first favorite read of the month, is one that I just would not have anticipated at all. And that is Crescent City, or House of Earth and Blood. We've all been calling it Crescent City, you know that. By Sarah J. Maas. Enough so that I've gone back and continued reading, what am I on? Empire of Storms, because I just like Sarah J. Maas. I don't know, but she's got a reputation here on BookTube, the kind of reputation where the people that read Sarah J. Maas are like laughed at, but I just don't care anymore because yes, she writes very similar stories every single time. The plot arc is very similar. The main character as well as love interests are all very much the same with slight differences, and they're all beautiful and hunky and muscular and no one looks as good as them. And you know who the love interest is going to be. Like, it's just, it's predictable, but in like a very comforting way. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is a story about Bryce, who, how do I explain this plot? People have probably given a much better synopsis of this plot, but essentially Bryce is like a party girl in this urban fantasy setting. And her best friend, Danica, is the head of the werewolf pack. So we have a bunch of different types of fantastical elements. There are angels and werewolves and vampires, much like Cassandra Clare's work. This is adult work. So really, if you've ever read anything by Sarah J Maas, it's that with a lot more swearing. That's really the only difference that I could tell. I don't want to get into much about the plot because I didn't read the flap. I did not read the synopsis of this. I just knew that it was kind of about gods and then it was an adult story and I wanted to give it a shot. So I did, and I'm glad I did. And going in blind really benefit me for the first 100 pages, I'd say. I think that if you don't know what the story is about, you should probably do that too, because the reviews I've seen that didn't absolutely love this book said that it was a little slow and it picked up in the second half. But I think that if you go in not knowing what the story's about, that first half won't drag as much. There was a lot of action in the second half and I just really had a lot of fun with it. It was, as I said, comfortably predictable, but also with enough badass moments that it was just fun. I really enjoyed it. I know Sarah J Maas isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I finally admitted to myself that she is my cup of tea. Then I read City of Glass, which I've already talked about, so we'll move on. And next I finally listened to Wild Card by Marie Lu. It is the sequel to Warcross. It's a book that I've been meaning to get to for a very long time because Lacey from Lacey D. Bell actually gave me that copy of Warcross, and I didn't anticipate loving it, but I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 stars. So I'd heard that Wildcard wasn't as strong, and I agree. I gave it 3 stars. The things that I think were missing from Wildcard that made Warcross so much fun is that in Warcross, you get the virtual game. Amika Chen in the first book has a lot at stake, and she goes into this virtual game where she's not supposed to be and plays this virtual game and is really good at it, and her team is great, and there's a lot of team dynamics in it. And that made the book fun, even though the plot underlying was darker. The second book focuses solely on the dark plot. This main creator of all the technology that's in the world, his brother has gone missing in the first book, and this sequel is a lot more about that storyline, and there's a lot less fun. So I thought it was okay. I don't regret reading it and like knowing how the story ends. I'm very happy that I know that the duology is done and how the story ends up working out, but it just wasn't as strong as Warcross. Then I read City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert, and I read this on the recommendation of Joshana and Ola, who I'll have linked down below. It's a story that the cover is very pretty, and I kept looking at it whenever I went to Barnes & Noble back before the quarantine, and I was intrigued by it. I really wanted to read it. For whatever reason, historical fiction has started to grow on me, especially if it's set in the 1920s-ish, which is what this is. This is a story about a girl who moves from like upper New York down to New York City to live with her aunt, and she ends up helping at her aunt's playhouse by doing costumes. And it was a lot of fun. It's kind of the shenanigans she gets into because she's very young when she moves there. I think she's 17. The way the story is written is very interesting. She's telling the story to a girl who, it starts out like, you want to know about my relationship to your father, this is it. And then you go way back. She wants to start from the beginning when she first moves to New York, and you get the whole story. So what I'll say about that, it was very unique. I liked how that was plotted, and I liked the writing so much. I will say that they are very long paragraphs and not a lot of dialogue, but the tone and the voice of the story was very good. So it kept you wanting to read. It wasn't like you didn't feel bogged down by these long paragraphs. But I will say that there was too much background story before you get to who this guy is that she meets and the whole purpose of writing the story. There's just too much, and it made the book a little bit too long, just a smidge longer than necessary, because I did get lost in the middle, not because of the plot, but because of my brain wondering, like, when are we getting to the meat of this story? But it was all entertaining, and the characters are so charismatic and different from each other and important, and I really had a lot of fun with it. I gave it a 4-star. I do highly recommend it, especially if you like that period of time and fiction around it. If you liked The Diviners, but you don't want a horror story, City of Girls is right up your alley. And the last book I read in March is the book that I gave no rating to, so I'm gonna do my best to talk about it without spoiling it, but also I have a lot of thoughts. I didn't not like this book. I actually very much liked it, and I did read it quite fast. That is A Good Neighborhood by Therese Ann Fowler. Okay, so this is a story about a Black single mother and her mixed race son, who his father has died when he was very little. They live in a neighborhood that at this point in time is starting to get houses, like everyone's old, so the houses are starting to get sold and rebuilt, richer people. So it's changing the dynamics of the neighborhood. And this woman is obsessed with her backyard. Like, she's an arborist. This is her thing. It's kind of like her focus outside of her son. The new neighbors that have built up a huge house and killed they took out all the trees in their backyard to build a pool, due to that yard work, have killed her favorite maple tree. Like, she's watching it slowly die. And because of that, she takes action that spirals downwards. The things I didn't like about it. So first and foremost, I saw somewhere on some review that it was like a modern day Romeo and Juliet, and I can kind of see that for sure. The story arc is that her son and the same-aged daughter of the new family end up like with a secret relationship, and that's kind of what the plot centers around, is that. This book has a lot of weird topics. One, blatant racism. We're in the South, we're in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina. I love North Carolina. Still a very racist place. This is also about pedophilia in a sense. Nothing ever, there isn't a whole lot of action about it, just a lot of fantasizing, and those were very rough scenes to read. But really, when it comes down to it, it's the racism that fucks with you, which is both of those things are so gross. But why I had trouble rating it is because this is a book written by a white female author who wrote a Black woman character who was a complete, and I don't know how to say this. She wrote, we talk a lot, we have a lot of discourse about taking someone else's story of a different race, of a different culture, and writing it. And I feel like this very much teeters the line on that. And it didn't sit well with me to have, first and foremost, the main woman, the Black single mother, makes a decision in the beginning of the book that made her look like a bitch, honestly. And it didn't sit well with me to have a woman of a different color write a character like that. And then the racism that ensues and the problems it causes for the biracial son also made me uncomfortable, because I felt like it wasn't her story to tell. But I did think it was an important story to tell, to explain that classism and racism is still alive and well in the United States. No one is, I think, turning a blind eye to that. But so it was hard I didn't want to rate it, because I was on the fence about thinking that it wasn't the right story for her to tell, but that it was an important story to tell. And I didn't hate it, and the writing was fluid, and the chapters were short, which I really love. And I will say there were some really poignant lines about racism. There's a line about how the biracial son, even though he's half white, will always be viewed as a Black man in a white person's eyes. Things like that were very important and smart and clever. And it was just it was a difficult topic and a difficult story to read from the writer that wrote it. But I didn't hate it. It's just one of those things. I obviously am not a person of color, so it's hard for me to really say the right things about this novel. So I haven't seen anyone else read this novel yet and review it publicly. So I would check Goodreads and see if any people of color read this and what their opinion was. Hopefully other booktubers of color will read it, but I haven't seen any that I am friends with or watch that have read this and have an opinion on it. So I'm hoping to see more of that come up in the future, because I really want to get like an own voices thought on it. If you know of anybody that has read this and has opinions on it, that is a person of color, I would like to know, so let me know down below. Or if I find any, I will bring it up in a vlog later in the month. But I am on the hunt to see what other people thought of this that weren't white like me. That's it. It was an interesting reading month. I did not expect to love my Dark Vanessa as much as I did. I definitely did not expect to love Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, but those were my top two contenders. Other than that, I didn't really have a least favorite, and then I did have that really difficult read with A Good Neighborhood. But overall, 13 books in a month is quite good, and I'm on track to kill it in April, so watch out for that reading vlog. I hope you guys are well. I hope that you're enjoying April and doing things that you find relaxing and enjoyable during this very weird time in the world. It's gonna be so weird to look back on these videos, I think, in the future. But anyway, if you're participating in the owls, I hope that you're doing really well towards your career, and I hope that you're happy and healthy, and I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. Like if you like this video, subscribe if you're new here and want to see more content from me. I post all my social media links down below. You can find me on Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter. I hope you're having a wonderful month and can get outside in some capacity. I will see you in the next one, guys.